Welcome to another episode of the Rip City Pod. I'm Eric Anderson. I'm a writer at Heavy.com, and I'm just here for the good times. Today we're going to do a little something slightly different, where we introduce a new segment to the pod called Let's Keep It Weird, as a nod to all weird things in Portland. And then we're going to go back into our regularly scheduled Blazers analysis, as well as Since We Last Spoke, our opening segment that kind of gets you up to speed on things that have happened with the Trailblazers since we last spoke. So, without further ado, let's get into it. Since we last spoke, we did mention Chauncey Billups being raided by the feds. Since then, he's been placed on leave from the team amid that federal probe. We had Tiago Splitter named interim coach. He's since then won some games. He's a 3-1 since that time. He's got wins over the Golden State, Los Angeles Lakers, and Utah Jazz. He dropped one to the LA Clippers. We're going to talk a lot more about those, but just as on the top note, he's 3-1 as a interim head coach. That's pretty good. We saw most recently in the Jazz game, Matisse Thybulle injured his left thumb. He'd been playing really well and had a ton of presence out there. He's a menace on defense, and he's really been fun to watch. So that's something to keep an eye on. We'll see what he can do, or if he'll miss any time, or how that affects his hands. That's a huge part of his game, is being able to get his hands in there and just take the ball away. But those are kind of the big things that have happened. Obviously, it was Portland's first road trip of the season, and they went 3-1 on that. 2-1 on that trip, 3-1 under Splitter, but 2-1 on their first road trip down to LA and to Utah. So that's pretty solid. And the defense has been a huge part of that. The defense was really talked a lot about in the summer, talked a lot about at the end of the season last April. And I think rightly so, people were wondering, is this defense real? Is this actually going to translate to the next season? There's a famous Bill Belichick quote about the offseason where you don't get better in the offseason, and in fact everything resets back to square one each season. So it's almost like each season is its own book that's being written, and you really can't carry something over that large period of time, having not practiced, not played together, not been together. And his point was you have to start building a thing, and that's why so many of those Patriots teams got better over the course of the season. And while they maybe didn't start elite as defenses, they usually finish pretty well as a defense, and obviously having Tom Brady helps a lot on offense. But I think a lot of people were wondering if this Blazers defense is going to be able to do this at a high level right away. Obviously, Chauncey Billups was telling us all about it in the offseason and in the preseason, and the pieces were there, but we hadn't really got to see much of it. Preseason didn't really tell us much of anything, and obviously an opening night loss to Minnesota when Anthony Edwards goes nuts wasn't quite. There was some feelings of inspiration, and the Blazers are going to be so fun this year, but there was also that very real headline that was Anthony Edwards couldn't be stopped. This defense couldn't stop Anthony Edwards. And then, the Blazers maybe notched an on paper signature win against Golden State, but it was a Golden State team that was playing on a back-to-back, and they just frankly were completely out of it. So it really wasn't. It's a 20-point win on paper. In a month from now, we'll forget the context of it, but it was one of the oldest teams in the NBA playing on a back-to-back while missing some players. So it's a game the Blazers should win, and it's a game the Blazers probably wouldn't have won a season or so ago. So it's really good for them to have captured that, but it wasn't like the biggest win of all time or anything like that, which kind of went into their first tough loss, which was a loss at the Clippers, where the Blazers just really weren't making shots. it's not a bad loss. I would argue the loss against Minnesota was worse because the Blazers were playing pretty well, but they couldn't stop Anthony Edwards. Where against the Clippers, the shooting just really wasn't there. Um, they were generating pretty good looks on offense, and for the most part, they were kind of harassing the correct players on defense. But it was kind of the same story with the Minnesota loss, where Kawhi just couldn't really have been stopped, and late game situations, he got to isolation plays and made enough relatively tough shots to carry a team. And it was a reminder that the Blazers don't really have a guy like that right now. It could be Shaedon Sharpe if he gets a little bit more polish of his on his offensive game. But Kawhi in that game had 30 points and shot, well over 50% from the field. So you just can't really expect to win games when a guy does that. And on the other end, if you're shooting 37% from the field, you're going to lose most games. Now, with all that said, I still think it was a pretty good loss. It felt like the Blazers were doing the things they needed to do on offense. The shots just weren't falling. And then obviously you hope the defense is a little bit better, but sometimes also guys just shoot elite. There's just incredible variance in shooting percentages that you can't control. So there wasn't anything that was like so alarming about that loss. I personally felt a lot better about that loss than I did about the Minnesota loss. I thought the Minnesota loss was a little bit haunting, and I thought it kind of got overshadowed a little bit by people just being excited that basketball was back. Like, oh my God, the Blazers were in a close game, and here they are, they're playing well, and isn't that fun? And I thought, well, no, because we were promised this incredible defense, and this defense couldn't deliver a stop when it mattered. So shouldn't we be a little more skeptical? No, it's a new season. Be excited. Stop being so cynical. My bad. Um, but then we saw this back-to-back wins to round out this road trip. So we'll go into it to kind of break down what happened there on a more in-depth level. But against the Lakers, it's a quality win in the sense that the Lakers are an intimidating opponent, just based on brand, based on national recognition, based on atmosphere. Um, you know, that arena is can be daunting for some players. But this was a Lakers team that again was just missing a ton of pieces. No Luka, no LeBron, and you're leaning on a massive effort from Austin Reeves to even make this one competitive. So the Blazers pretty much controlled it all throughout. And you saw really good performances from the starters. You saw another big effort from, Jeremy Grant off the bench. He had 22 points, 3 rebounds, 3 assists, 3 blocks, and a steal. I think, or 3 steals and a block. And I think those steals and blocks are pretty critical to look at because a season ago, or even his last 5 years in the NBA, really, he hasn't been generating a ton of steals and blocks. I don't have the number pulled up in front of me right now, but he kind of made this name for himself with the Nuggets as being a really elite defender. And then he took this hiatus from competitive basketball and went and spent time in Detroit and just kind of got offensive stats. Like he got his numbers for the first time in his career. He's just jettisoned in Detroit while Detroit's rebuilding and messing with pieces and messing with head coaches. And so no one really knew what Jeremy Grant could do. So when the Blazers traded for him, it was supposed to be this appeasement to Damian Lillard to bring in another piece that could score. And then the thinking was like, well, he can score. He's sure he can score, but also he's got these defensive chops. Obviously, Jeremy's still a really good defender, but those defensive chops didn't always translate into steals and blocks. So when you see him in a stat sheet do something like this, 3 steals and a block, you go, oh, this is the Jeremy Grant that, again, any playoff team would really want on their team. As I take a nice sip of water. So that I was super encouraged by that. But again, overall, this game is just a matter of can the Blazers beat an inferior team, and that's what the Lakers are in that current iteration of them. When your starters are Rui Hachimura, Jared Vanderbilt, Jake LaRavia, DeAndre Ayton, and Austin Reeves, it's the Blazers should win. If they're a good team, they should win, and they did that handily. There's a few post game comments from DeAndre Ayton about how much trash Deni Avdija was talking to him and letting me hear about it, and that was kind of good and fun. But I don't think the Blazers are missing DeAndre Ayton, and he hasn't really had a super solid stint so far in LA. So we'll see if he turns it around or when he gets more time with Luke on the court. what that version of the Lakers actually looks like. And maybe when LeBron joins the party too, there might be even more open opportunities for him. But so far, it's kind of been we don't really miss you too much, DeAndre Ayton. So that was a solid win. And then obviously the Blazers played on October 29th on Wednesday against the Jazz, which ended up kind of being a competitive game. There was moments where it looked like the Blazers were going to blow them out, and then there was moments where it looked like the Blazers were going to blow it. So it's kind of a relief to win this game, and it gives the Blazers their first winning record of the season at 3-2. But I think the headlines going into the game were Lauri Markkanen had scored 50 points, 50 plus points, and that was a freakish effort. And were the Blazers going to handle that? And they kind of did. Lauri only had 32 points this game, but he also just did a ton. He had 3 steals, 3 blocks, 5 rebounds, 2 assists. He did a little bit of everything, and Lauri Markkanen's also kind of been in that same vein as Jeremy, where he gets you a lot of offensive production, and you can actually run an entire offense through him. But he hasn't really been a guy that gets you a ton of defensive stats. So against the Blazers, all of a sudden he's doing everything, shooting an elite percentage, getting to the foul line. Um, he was just a really tough matchup for them. And this is a Jazz team that starts Kyle Filipowski, Walker Kessler, Svi Mihailuk, and Keontae George, which are names that probably a lot of casual NBA fans will go, "What? Who? Who? What? This is a team that's going to give someone trouble." But the Jazz have been kind of sneaky competitive in their games so far this season. They're 2-2, and they've had some pretty quality efforts so far. So for the Blazers to hold on and just get out of there with a win is pretty solid. And Drew Holiday went nuts in this one. He had 27, 3 rebounds, or excuse me, 5 rebounds, 8 assists, 2 steals. Like that's an incredible Drew Holiday game. If you get that kind of offensive production out of him anytime this season, it's incredible. So for him to lead the Blazers in scoring and just kind of be that solid presence everywhere on the court is really, really good stuff. And it's just a good breaking point for the Blazers to kind of look in the mirror and go, okay, do we like what we're seeing so far with Splitter's offense? And what about our defense needs to change in the sense that we're giving up a lot of points, but the Blazers are being super disruptive on defense. So there's some metrics that are just like a very illustrious for the Blazers right now. Their adjusted defensive rating puts them 10th in the league, which is solid. Their defensive efficiency puts them at ninth in the league. They give up, 1 point per 100 possessions, if I'm reading that correctly. Um, and then their points allowed per game is where the stats start to skew the wrong direction, where you go, like, they're giving up about 118 a game, and that's about average in the NBA. But, they're doing all these other things like getting tons of steals and harassing ball handlers and forcing 8-second calls in the backcourt. That's just like really, it's unique. You notice it when you watch the team, and not all these teams do it. So it's like it's very interesting. Um, I think I think the Blazers defense is like at a point where it's producing. It'll just need to be clamped down a little bit um, for that overall point total to actually um, show on paper. And that's, that can be a vanity stat sometimes, but the Blazers are doing a ton of stuff that's really good, and I wouldn't push the panic button just based on that. Giving up a couple major scoring games to like the Jazz and Golden State's going to get their points, and obviously Minnesota's going to get their points, but um, I wouldn't worry about that too much. And the Blazers are just continuing to record tons of steals. I think Matisse Thybulle has like 8 games in a row of recording a steal, and the Blazers are one of the best stealing teams in the league. So they're generating extra possessions out of taking the ball away and building this kind of brand of basketball that you'd think would translate into the playoffs. I'm not saying the Blazers are going to make the playoffs, and you can guarantee that from here on out, but this would be a team as currently constructed that you wouldn't want to see in a playoff series because the defense would be hellacious. Um, the Blazers would create a hellacious situation for the opposing team. This is a style of play that absolutely translates to most matchups, and the only thing, which has been the case in a few games this season so far, is um, do the Blazers get enough scoring? Do they have someone that can carry the offensive burden late into games? And it makes anybody wonder, if Dame were healthy this season, would the Blazers be a perfectly constructed roster? Do they have enough defensive chops and are just one scorer away from being really, really good and being elite? Because those are the two losses. The two losses are losing to an elite scoring Kawhi and elite scoring Anthony Edwards while playing like a really high brand of defense. If they have a healthy Damian Lillard in those games, do they win? They might. And maybe not. Maybe the defense would take such a big blow from Lillard playing 30 some minutes a game that it would change the whole equation. We can't really know that yet. And we might not ever know it. This version of the Blazers might not be the version of the Blazers that come around next year when Dame's healthy. But it just makes you wonder if the Blazers had that one elite scorer, um, what would this team be? Would this team be a top four team in the West? And I suspect they would, but obviously that's speculation at best right now. But only other things to note really quick here before we get out of here is early season Deni Avdija has been just on fire. He's averaging 22 points per game, which is up 6 points from a season ago. And everything he's doing is like suggesting that he's playing at an all-star level. Obviously, that is not really up for him to decide. There's a fan vote, there's media influence that's required, but just looking at his stats through 5 games, 22 points per game, 6.4 rebounds, 4.2 assists, a block, about half a steal, and shooting 48% from the field, 38% from the 3-point line, and 80% from the foul line. Most of those are career best. The 3-point shooting right now would be his career best. His foul shooting would be his career best, and his point total obviously is his career best. Rebounding also at career best. And it's not really like he's getting just pumped full of minutes. He played about 30 minutes a game a season ago, and he's up to playing to 32 minutes a game. So a couple extra minutes means there should be more production, but the scoring is remarkable, and we'll see if that maintains. But things you'd like to think that will stick will be that shooting percentage. That's about where he's been the last 2 seasons, so there's no reason to think that'll regress too much. The foul shooting typically can swing either way a little bit, but that maybe could come down a couple percentage points. The rebounding isn't even his career best, so he's probably going to stick somewhere around there. Assists are up just a little bit. I think that's also relatively safe to stick. The blocks are about double the rate of his block rate in past seasons, so that might be a little bit of an anomaly. But there's not really a ton of warning signs here that say this production is going to come down. So I think what you're seeing from Deni is sustainable, and he might be an all-star this season. And obviously, when you watch the Blazers, you see this guy, and he's a wrecking ball of a human when he attacks the basket. His Euro steps lethal. His crossover's been crazy in transition. He's just leaving guys in the dust that you didn't realize he could do that, and you didn't realize his handle was solid enough where he could make that quick of a move. And when a guy actually gets in front of him, Deni just moves people out of the way. He's so strong. Every time I watch him play and he puts his shoulder into someone, I just think LeBron. And I'm not trying to say Deni Avdija is the poor man's LeBron or the Middle Eastern version of LeBron, but he moves people around with just like such reckless strength. It's incredible. Um, so I'm floored every time I see it. He's so strong, and that's also something that's going to translate really well into high pressure games. Into, again, I'm saying playoff basketball, but if you see Deni Avdija and he's driving down the lane in a playoff game, he's going to get calls, or he's going to be physical enough where he doesn't need the call and he can keep finishing anyways. He's been really, really fun to watch, and that's definitely caught my attention so far early in the season. But as promised, we're gonna do one fun segment that we're maybe will be basketball related, maybe not. We're calling it "Let's Get Weird." So it's Halloween season. It's spooky out there, and my wife and I just watched Nightmare on Elm Street for the first time. Both, I'm familiar with the concept. I didn't see the movies as a kid. I'd seen clips, and I'd played a video game that showed me how Freddy Krueger worked. Shout out to anyone who's ever played Dead by Daylight before. It brings all the killers together, so you can have lots of fun with it. But we finally watched it, and it's just amazing to me how horror movies, especially from that era, like maybe 70s, 80s, 90s, don't really hold up. There's still things that you realize are happening in the movie that were probably incredible at the time and like profound and scary and amazing. But the more you watch them in the 2020s and you know in this century, you just realize how funny these little things become. Like it's not so scary anymore as it is like it's a comedy. Horror movies kind of shift to like light comedies where you're watching it just kind of like revel at the absurdity of things. So there's plenty of moments like that in Nightmare on Elm Street where you're just watching and going like, that that must have been scary. It's no longer scary now. Like the fact that Freddy Krueger just looked so messed up must have been what Wes Craven thought was going to scare people, and I think it did legitimately scare people for many many years. Obviously, Freddy Krueger is like an iconic killer, and people still know his name, and he's still a part of pop culture in a way. But watching it now, it was funny. So if you haven't watched an old school horror movie before the Halloween rolls around, you should definitely jump on that and that's how we're keeping it weird this week. So that'll wrap up this episode of Rip City Pod. Thanks for stopping by, and you stay classy, Portland.